Hello, everybody. I am Julie Kurtz, and I am the CEO and the founder for the Center for Optimal Brain Integration. Today, it is my honor, and I'm very excited to have three of the several authors on this book supporting gender diversity in early childhood classrooms. I read this book a long time ago. My soul was touched. I learned so much, and I can't wait till they are all able to share their wisdom and their collective wisdom and knowledge, and that you'll be able to learn something from this book and from this interview. Today, I want to also share with you at the Center for Optimal Brain Integration, one of the mantras we have is giving every child and adult a voice. And today, that's what we're going to do. What I'd like to do is have my guests introduce themselves. Encian, would you like to start first?
Sure. Thank you for having us here, Julie. My name is Encian Pastel, and I am a teacher and program co-director at a parent participation cooperative preschool in Berkeley, California.
And Nathanael, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. So I'm Nathanael Flynn. I am a teacher, a preschool teacher as well as Encian, and I earned my master's at Mills College in Oakland.
Beautiful.
My master's in early childhood education.
And that's important, right? You've got that expertise in writing this book. And Julie, would you like to go?
Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Nicholson, and Julie Kurtz and I have worked together for a long time. You writing a lot of different books and doing a lot of work in trauma responsive practice. I also am a professor of early childhood at Mills College in Oakland and a co-director of a new nonprofit, the Center for Equity in Early Childhood Education. And it's wonderful to be here.
It's so exciting to be here. I know this interview is going to be short, and what we want to do is capture as much as possible to share with the folks that will be listening in. The first question I have for you is, how did this book come about? What prompted you to write it?
I can start that. So we are just 3 out of an 8-person team who wrote this book, and their other names are on here. One of them, Tess Unger, was working at a preschool, and they had a gender expansive child in their school that year, and none of the staff knew what to do, and they all wanted to be supportive, but what they ended up doing with the intention of being supportive backfired and made a really hard time for that child and for the school as a whole. And Tess thought, well, I need to find resources to help us get better at supporting gender diversity in all of the children in our classroom. And she couldn't find any. So even in the anti-bias resources and in the types of resources that are about equity and diversity and inclusion and belonging, there was no accounting for anything outside of binary gender when it came to gender, really. And so that was really the spark, the impetus that led to the formation of our group, and also the printing of this book, which we hope will fill that gap so that there is somewhere to go. However, we also, as we wrote it, thought about how we don't want centers to be in that position of reacting to a certain child in their program or a certain family. We want them to already be thinking about how to make gender wonderful, inclusive, diverse programs before they have a child who specifically is having a hard time or needing that.
Yeah. And I don't know if Julie and Nathanael want to add anything to that.
I think the one piece that I would add is that when writing the book, we were thinking not just about transgender and gender expansive kids, but about how do we build healthy relationships with gender and equitable relationships with gender for everybody, and how can teachers support that? So I think oftentimes these things come up because of somebody who challenges our questions, but those questions are there for all of us.
And Julie, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I do, because building on what both of my wonderful colleagues have shared, we realized that not only there were not resources that were available to Tess and her colleagues, but that early childhood professionals working with children and families in many contexts were learning about gender and young children's gender development in courses, community college or four-year colleges, and then professional development. in ways that reinforced the binary. But then when we looked at the theory, there was also a need for sort of retheorizing. It was not just the practices and the strategies, but even the theory. We had to go all the way back to thinking about the young child in a different way. And so we've written this book, we've written another book that looks at theory. We've tried to share some resources. We'll be talking about those on our website. But we just want to say, we found this huge gap. And so it was an important thing to address it all the way through, from the theory to the practice to the tools that teachers and others can use.
And your book certainly covers all of those things. And I would say, as I venture to the next question, one of the things that I'm hearing frequently, because this topic is emerging more and more. In fact, I've had recent conversations with people that are saying the schools now are having children introduce themselves with pronouns. And of course, whenever you start something new, there's always a population of people that are like, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do this when there's only like a small percentage of kids? And it's causing anxiety for people because it's unknown. And then the second thing that I'm hearing is, I want to do this, but I don't know where to start. I don't want to do the wrong thing. I'm scared to say the wrong thing. I'm scared to offend. And when we think about those people that are out there, and by the way, I'll also say there are many terms being used today that when you listen, you may not understand them, but we will have a glossary of the terms for you. And we will also share with you that in the book are all the answers to those terms as well. So would any of you like to start with answering that? Why should we do this?
Nathanael, would you like to start this one?
I think the thing that for me in my own story that I like to share is that growing up, I knew a trans adult who transitioned in the 80s. I was really lucky because for me, that meant that I knew I could exist. And that not only I knew, but my entire community knew. So when I came out later in life, my family was prepared to be like, okay, cool, thank you for telling me, and had some schema for what to do. And that was so protective for me. And I tell that story because one of the reasons why is because kids are getting hurt. When you don't see yourself in the curriculum, in the possibilities in the world around you, it's really scary and it's really hard to have a good sense of self. And so there are particular kids for whom this is a very, very important topic for us to work through because they aren't represented in the narratives that we necessarily learned as kids, or the narratives that we've thought of when we go into our classrooms and start creating this world for them to explore. And that would be my first answer as to why this is so important, is that there are kids that need us now. And then we may or may not know that they're in our classrooms until we are trustworthy people to talk to about it.
And I'll add to that my story as a young kid who was trans but didn't know it was that I didn't have a trans adult in my life, and I had zero understanding that that was a possibility, that changing one's gender, expressing to people that one's gender was other than what I was being told it was, which was female, and didn't feel right. I didn't know that that was possible. I didn't have any language for that, and I didn't have any role models for that. And so what ended up happening is I just felt wrong in a lot of ways, anyway, like related to my body, anyway, related to all of these roles and behaviors that I was supposed to be, learning in order to fit in with the girls. And as a result, I just sort of shut myself in and got very quiet and developed a lot of shame that it took a long, long time to work through as a young adult and as an adult. And that's sort of where I'm coming in from my story. But I also want to say, sort of in answer to the question of why is this important? It can be really scary, like you said, to shake your foundational beliefs and try a new practice. And it can feel like, why are we turning things upside down? Why do we have to do these extra steps? We're just trying to have the beginning of the year and get to know people. Sharing pronouns, what is that about? But I think the way I see it is that the world as it is without changing ourselves in that way upside down a little bit is not working for anyone. That binary gender, this idea that there are only two genders, that which gender you go into is decided by your body before you're even born, and that's going to have all of these expectations associated with it about behavior, about your even like personality type, about what you're drawn to, what your interests are, about what you can look like physically, about who you're going to be attracted to, all of these things, right? That schema, it doesn't work for the people who need to go out of their box that they're assigned into, but it also doesn't work for the people who are pretty much okay in their box, because we do these workshops, right? Like we talk to people at different preschools, at different early childcare centers and around. And what we start with is just giving people some time and space to think about the messages that they received about gender when they were a young child and growing up, and perhaps even to this day. What were the messages that you received, that I received, and they're all looking different from each other. There's not one standard way that this binary gender thing looks. It's different culturally, it's different based on geography, it's different based on your age, but what they all have in common is that everyone's had an experience of being limited, of being constricted, of wanting to try something, but being told that's not for you. And when you're a young child and you don't try something, that can lead to never ever trying that again in your life. That can lead to, forming these patterns and these schemas that are going to be foundational to your way of understanding the world. And as adults who have developed those schemas, who have our like cemented, hardwired brains, we all know that that's so hard to change and shift. Not impossible. We can do it. Our brains are elastic. But when you're a young child, that's the easiest thing in the world, is to learn new ideas, is to have new concepts. And that's the time that we really need to be embracing a sense of wonder, of curiosity, and of inclusion of all of the ways of being, right? I have not seen any harm come from asking children to let us know who they are and being willing to listen to what they're saying, as long as we do it in a way where we're attuned to their emotional state at the time. I have seen a ton of harm come from not asking those questions. And the other thing I want to add, I'm going on a little too long. The other thing I want to add is that it's not like we're suddenly like throwing this big machine like, okay, in the past, you have not had to worry about gender, but now we have all of these things that you have to do immediately. What actually is the case is that we have this big machine there already. It's just invisible because it's become, it's taught as normal, it's taught as natural, but it's not, and it doesn't feel that way to each of us. It's made culturally, historically, it's made by people. So this expectation that you don't have to share pronouns relies on this expectation that people are going to be able to tell what gender you are by looking at you, or by what it says on your documents, or by what the parents of the child says. And that in itself is, it's a choice. It's just not a choice that we make willingly. And so I guess what we're trying to do in our book is to get to people to understand why that choice is not sustainable, why it's not sustainable for humans to, yeah.
So powerful. Both you and Nathanael. I mean, I just got the chills listening to you when Nathanael said, I knew that I could exist. That was so protective of me. And I wrote down what another thing Nathanael said: when you don't see yourself, it is just really scary and it's terrifying. And then Encian, when you said the shame that you developed, when you knew in your body who you were, but you didn't see in the classroom or in others or models around you, and that shame, and then you began to shut down. I feel like this is the why behind it all. And Julie, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that as well.
I do.
Yeah.
And I so appreciate, you can see why I love working with these colleagues, so I want to say that I identify as a white cisgender woman And as you said, you're going to share the glossary, but I can say that what that means is that the gender that I identify with as female is the same as what I was legally designated when I was born by the doctors based on, them looking at my genitalia and so on. And as a cisgender female who takes extremely important in my role as a professor of early childhood, the kind of ethical responsibility that we have in our field as I'm supporting people coming into the field to learn about our field and to think about what their job responsibility is, whether they are working with preschool, infants and toddlers, families, home visiting, early childhood education, special education. No matter the role, that our responsibility is to do no harm, right? And to support to the best of our ability for every single child and family that we work with to feel respected, to feel valued, to feel a sense of belonging and a sense of visibility and a sense of safety. And all of those things that we support them every interaction, every day, to build resilience, to build that sense of thrivance, right? So that they feel like they are able to learn and develop to their capacity. And we talk about this all the time, Julie, in our trauma responsive work. If children don't feel a sense of safety, psychological, emotional, physical safety in our presence, and that can come across as not knowing if a teacher says, I want the boys to line up here and the girls to line up here, and they don't know which line to go in. If they don't feel safe because they go over to the dress up clothes and they dress up, they choose clothes that feel comfortable to them, but they're told to put those down. If they don't see pictures of themselves or language that describes who they are in the books or the stories or the people that come into the classroom, these are little invalidations, little aggressions that say, like Nathanael and Encian were saying, I don't see you, you're not safe here, you don't belong. And over, these can be things we're not even aware of, but that harm that child and create that sense that won't allow them to learn and develop to their potential. So I just want to say that my job every day is to say, I have to, even if this wasn't my lived experience and my learned experience, which it was, and I learned from beautiful students who came up to me and said, you didn't ask me, we didn't talk about pronouns, Julie, when you started the class today. And I said, I don't know what that means, but I want to know. And I invited them to my office and I said, teach me. And I used something we'll talk a little bit more about, but something called emergent listening, where you are listening and learning from somebody and you are willing to change how you think, how you behave, how you feel based on what you hear. And it may profoundly challenge your vision of the world. And that emergent listening is what has brought me in as a cisgender woman, learning, listening, always being humble to my colleagues to this day in every interaction. But we have that responsibility.
This is so powerful. And Julie, there's so much that you said and everybody said, but I try to highlight a few things. This thing about creating safety, and that if you're not seen for who you are and who you are uniquely, it's not safe. And that's what stood out to me the most is when a parent says, why should we do this when the majority of kids are this? Let's ignore them. That's harm and that's not creating safety. So thank you for that incredible response. I think, it's interesting as a therapist, I'm hearing more adults have stress about it. And then I had a child that I talked to was 10 years old, and just a casual conversation, she says to me, yeah, we started school and I met a new friend today, and their name was, and I'll just make up a name, Mike. And I don't know what Mike's pronoun is. So I asked Mike, what's your pronoun? And it was just like a casual conversation. I think the kids are doing better with this than the adults, because I think their brains are more able to handle the fluidity of the change and the new knowledge. But I do have another question for all of you. Where do people start? How does your book share, or what are some tips you can share on practical steps of where an adult or a teacher, an educator can start to build an inclusive classroom, a safe classroom, an intentional space where every child's seen?
Great question. And I'll start in on this. I think, it's a bit of a chicken and the egg, because there's a lot of different starting places, and they all work as long as you kind of branch out into the other ones as well. And we're not going to have time to give you a laundry list. So I want to point to where you can find things in the book. So one of the things that we stress is in chapter 2 of our book. It's attuned and responsive relationships. And this is, again, you can't only have an attuned relationship if you have no understanding of kind of gender expansiveness, gender diversity. It's only going to get you so far, but it's an absolute requirement for any of this other work. And it's a good place to start, even if you don't know anything else. And the place to start is, as Julie was saying, with emergent listening, with paying attention to children, to what they're telling us with their words, their play, their art, their interactions with each other, what we might label their acting out or their behavior, which we also know is a form of communication and expression of needs. All of these modes of communication we can tune into and we can be responsive to. And when we listen with the openness to being changed by what we're hearing, by what we're seeing, that is going to lead us to where we need to get, because there's no one path to gender inclusive classrooms, to gender justice in early childhood. There's as many paths as there are specific classrooms and people and communities, right? And children. And so what we try to do in our book is give you some strategies that are going to help you in these different situations, questions to ask as you go along in your own journey, in your own path. And one of the other sort of practical steps that we have in our book, well, also in that chapter, we talk more about what that looks like, what those relationships, those attuned and responsive relationships look like, and some of the common kind of pitfalls and things that we see happening currently in relation to gender. But then the next chapter is about self-awareness. And it's about doing our own self-work on uncovering all of our beliefs and our internalized messages that we carry through the day about gender, and to start to think about them with some intention and some curiosity and see what is serving us in the world right now and the people we work with, and what do we need to start to let go of, and what do we need to change. And that is, again, and completely critical. Like, you can't just borrow a protocol from another school about like introducing pronouns without knowing how you feel about your own pronouns, and without going through that sort of journey. Otherwise, it's going to be meaningless. And then you also can get into some sticky situations if you're just like copying things. So in our book, we have lots of reflection questions that we really recommend tackling one at a time. You know, it can be over time, it can be with a friend, it can be by yourself, it can be with a group, like if you're able to do this with your staff, that's a great group of people to be reading this book together. But we have specific questions in there. They're also on our website. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then the other sort of step one that I want to highlight is in the first chapter, we talk about Gender 101, because there's like so much, right? Like, people write PhDs about what is gender. Like, it's not simple, it's complex. There's a lot of moving parts, and you don't need to become an expert. You don't need to get your own PhD in gender studies, but you do need to have some sense of why we are where we are right now. With what binary gender is not this like natural essential thing. And that's like where a lot of this debate is coming in. People saying, yes, of course it is, because it has to do with bodies. And other people saying, well, yeah, it has to do with bodies. It also has to do with a lot of other things. And it's, you know, it's the way it is for a reason. And that reason involves power. It involves a history of colonialism, of European colonialism, and not, I'm not going to get into all of it right now. But what I will say is that you need to do some work, not only in uncovering your own personal messages that you've received about gender, but looking at how gender works through power relationships in the world, in our own communities, and then in a broader sense in our larger society. And that's key also. And so that's also, we touch on that a bit in the first chapter of the book. And then comes all of those fun little tips about like how to organize your clothing bins for extra clothing for kids, and what to put up on your walls, and what kind of literature to look for. And those are all important, crucial things as well. But to me, the sort of foundational aspects are being able to change your lens from looking at the world in terms of there are two genders, binary gender, to looking at the world as, wow, there's all of these possibilities. Male and female are still valid, totally important identities, but they're not the only two, and you're not trapped in one for the rest of your life based on what you were assigned at birth, right? When you're able to do that self-work and the learning from others to shift that lens, then you're able to start noticing, okay, so how am I reinforcing binary gender in my classroom? How can I start to shift those things? Who are the allies in my community that I can look to do that together with? I'll pause there and let my colleagues jump in.
Incredible. Who else would like to share?
Nathaniel, do you want to add anything before I jump in?
Go ahead, Julie.
So one thing I'm thinking about to add, you can see, Julie, there's so much. We love to talk about this, and we could talk for hours and hours on this topic. But one thing that's coming to my mind is that you hear us in the book, and here you've heard us talk about this idea of attunement. And it's really a big idea for us that you are kind of mindfully present. And what does attunement feel like for the child, or you can imagine for you as an adult? Think about when you are in the presence of somebody else. We're all lucky if we have somebody in our life who we feel that sense of attunement with. When we are with them, we just feel like we are the most important person right there. They're not distracted. They're not checking their phone. They're not just talking to us to get information for something to get done. You feel heard, you feel felt, you feel visible. And that idea is a really important idea as a place to start, and building that sense of noticing and just being present for a child, and that attunement. Because one of the things that some people might worry about in getting started with this work is thinking that they have to learn about all the different vocabulary so that they can decide what gender a child is, right? And that is not at all. And you'll see in the book, we talk about that's not our responsibility. And children that we're working with in early childhood are exploring identity, and they're going to be playing and sort of, they're communicating, but it's not even appropriate for us to say a 3-year-old is going to tell us what their gender is at 3, and that's going to be stable. So I want to just say that the attunement is the goal, to notice who that child is today in front of you right here, right now, and to make sure they feel supported, but not to feel that you're learning about all of this so that you can say that child is transgender, that child is male, that child, that's not what this work is. And so knowing that the stance is one of observer, listener, support, that kind of consistent, responsive adult, I think one of the most important things that we want to suggest is your first step and your consistent step, your second step, your third step, but a really important first step.
Well, you said something that stood out to me. You said that children are, it's fluid. It's not like, okay, at 3 years old, we decide they're now male, and that it's fluid, that it's an exploration. And it reminds me of the time that a parent called me saying that her daughter came home crying because she's trying to figure out if she's bisexual or she's, and she's like, why are they talking about all this at school? Because now it's causing my daughter more anxiety. It's like, oh, you just said something that stood out to me. It's about exploration. It's about curiosity. It's not about, let's find out in this moment what you are and it's over. And I think that's what I heard you say.
Slightly, but I'm going to invite my colleagues to respond to this.
Yeah.
It's not always fluid. It can be fluid, and it's not for us. This is our wonderful, colleague in the field, Diane Aronsaft. She said it is not for us to tell. It is the children who know. We give children agency in early childhood to make choices at circle time, to make choices all throughout other parts of their identity, their interests, their preferences, their ways of learning. And we talk about honoring, it is children who know the identity inside of who they are. And I'm going to stop there and let Nathanael and Encian speak to that.
I think you did a beautiful job, Julie, of really highlighting. For some people, it is clear and they are articulate, and that is true for trans kids as well as gender expansive kids as well as cisgender kids. And then there are other kids for whom they're finding language or they're finding the nuances within that identity. Because, male is a big umbrella, female is a big umbrella. I was talking to a kid recently, and what she said to me is, I'm a woman, so I want to do kid woman things. And that was where she was at in exploring gender. And then my next question was, so tell me more, what are kid woman things? What does that mean? And she was like, you could tell she was like, I've been making assumptions, and you're the first person asking me to self-define. And that was a really neat conversation to be there for, because it, even within this child who, as far as I know, is cisgender, there's still lots of nuances. There's lots of things to get to, and there's lots of traps in my, it's sort of an inside joke between me and some friends of that moment when you notice oh, that's going to take me down a path that's going to hurt. So to re-articulate that, I think there's this piece of, it is so easy to absorb what the world says about gender and I'm forgetting the words, but stop yourself from trying things because of this identity. So being able to expand what that identity is, to be able to expand that cooking doesn't mean one gender or another, it means one activity. And you can do it in a gendered way if that's there for you and that's something you want to explore. And you can do it in a loving way, or you can do it in a muddy way, or you can, right? There's lots of opportunities, and that the more we can help kids accept that there are possibilities that could be true for them and not, and true or not for other people, the more I feel like we prepare them for the world that they're growing up in.
Wow. It's incredible. Nathanael, I have one follow-up question for you before we pivot to our final question of something that's in your book that stood out to me, and other resources for folks. When a child comes home exploring out loud verbally with their parent, and it causes the parent anxiety because they want everything to be in a box, and what would you say? What advice would you give a parent to do to handle that emoting of the child or verbal expression of uncertainty?
I think there's two things. I think with really young children, oftentimes we get them coming home and saying, this is the fact. And that is often, this is the hypothesis I have based on. So one story I can tell is a child in my classroom where I'd sort of been saying, some girls, where it's the toilet learning time, some girls can pee standing up or whatever it is. That one of the kids went home and said, is this true? Like, how does this work? And the parents sort of, without thinking, was like, yeah, girls do this, boys do that. And the kid looks and says, Nathanael says that's wrong. Unfortunately, the parent and I had already talked. We'd already sort of had conversations, and the parent was able to be like, you know what, Nathaniel's right. Like that these things aren't inherently based on anything. That it's true for some people, but not everyone. And she was both sort of entertained by that moment and also grateful that she like had that second moment to be pushed back by her kid and to sort of open up. So I think there's some pieces that like one is thinking about it ahead of time. So, you know, one of the things we talk about in the book is like, sometimes this is a parent meeting early on in the school year. Sometimes this is in your, like the packets that you give to parents. And often like articulating your beliefs as a school and what your values are is really important. So a lot of times it comes back to, okay, these are our values. So where do we move forward? And I think in families, that's true too. Like these are our values. And then where do we move forward? I also think that sometimes what happens is like kids have questions and you want to be there for their questions and to ask them. I think it's easy to be like, oh, let me quickly give you an answer. And sometimes that's what kids want. And sometimes they're sort of trying to test out or explore something. And I think oftentimes also notice your reaction, right? Like sometimes it's be there for the question. Sometimes it's notice your reaction and notice when something's coming up for you. Because I think one of the things that happens with gender is that people have a response because they're scared.
Yeah.
And that they're scared of kids being teased. They're scared of kids being bullied. They're scared of kids growing up to be unsafe. They're scared of kids not having the resources they need or the tools they need to be able to be healthy and happy as who they are later on or now, right? And sometimes, and it's a very real thing that boys in particular are teased for female coded behavior. But it's a really real thing. And that a lot of times, like for parents to notice your behavior and for teachers to stay in that uncomfortable moment and not try to solve it, but to try and hear the parents out. Like, what is their big worry? What is their big fear? And what can we reassure them about? What can we ask them to think more about? One of the ways this has come up in my experience is through the clothing bins at school. I've worked in classrooms where we've been like, so I know of classrooms where there's a girl bin and a boy bin of clothes. And I really encourage people to just have clothes because sometimes that's the only access kids have to wearing clothes, not costumes. And one of the kids I worked with, like every time she went to the bin, she wanted like the ringer t-shirts and the cargo shorts. And eventually, and it was different than the clothes she had from home. And eventually her mom did say like, okay, so what's going on? Like every time she gets dirty, she comes home in these clothes. And I was like, well, these are her choices. These are what she likes to do. And it helped the family sort of notice that they had these preconceived notions of who their girl would be. And to see them over time be able to attune more and more to who their kid is. And have like this imagination of like a girl who loves balls and sports uniforms can be a happy kid, right? And can be like, and there's a way to connect and attune to that part of that who she is, without having it be like, well, this means she grows up to be, and just to like slow down, notice those moments, and also be there to listen, because sometimes hard things happen, but we all can manage hard things. Like we all figure out how to manage these things, and we all figure out when we need adults as resources.
Thank you, Nathaniel. That was incredible. What I want to do in closing is pull up a visual of the book as well as a website that you've created for resources, and then offer one more opportunity for each of you in this short interview, because I'm learning so much. I now realize this could be a 8-hour training, which might be something that you share. Is that something that you do? So let me first share the screen, because I want all of our listeners to be able to visually see the screenshot that I took from Amazon. It's on Amazon. And this website here, which we'll also provide later. But if each of you could close with just a short, whether it be the self-audit tool that you have in your book that I just loved, or the website, or any other resources that people can learn more information. And Encian, do you want to start?
Sure. So yes, on our website, we are always uploading resources. We also have a mailing list you can sign up for on the website, and a Facebook group you can join, where when we do develop a new resource, we post them to both those things. And one of the resources we're developing right now is a comic book graphic novel version of our second book, called Radically Listening to Transgender Children, which is a little bit of a deeper dive into the theory of what is happening, what does gender injustice look like, and what can we do about it? And it's more of a theory book. So in the graphic novel, we have this concept of the gender constellation. And that is sort of an answer to, okay, well, but if we don't have binary gender with the two boxes, like, what is it getting replaced by? And it's getting replaced by a more expansive vision of what gender can be. And there's lots of different people in groups who have put images to that and models and metaphors to that. And the one that we find really helpful is this metaphor we've been co-developing called gender constellations. And here's just kind of like a little glimpse of what a gender constellation looks like. It's these constellations that are in the process of being drawn and redrawn by each of us. And I can't go into it now, but it's in the comic, and it's going to be online probably before this interview here is released. So head over to the website and check it out.
Incredible. Thank you. And Julie, would you like to share? You're the second person in my visual photo, so I'm going to.
Sure. So I'll just answer, building off of what Encian said, I'll just answer the question that yes, we do in our group of authors, but also we have a larger collective of folks who are working on gender justice in early childhood. We do trainings. Sometimes they're shorter, sometimes they're, we have people can contract for multiple trainings, and we really love when they do, because it is, as you saw today, such an important topic, and there's so much to get to. But we do have folks that, and we love to work with groups all across the country, mostly online if folks aren't here in the Bay Area with us. But we would love to talk to folks about our work and this important topic. Mm-hmm.
Great. And Nathanael, close us out.
I think the thing that I really appreciated us creating is those moments when you're like, I just need help. I need help articulating this. I need help coming up with books and resources. I need help asking myself questions or getting started. And there is within the website a resource link. And there's everything from acronyms that help sort of remind you of strategies you can use to be attuned, or there's a list of books that we like, and also a list of things to look for in literature, and ways to start your own stories, because inevitably the publishing world is behind the way we're articulating our stories. They're catching up to that always. And so there won't always be the book already in existence that you want or need, and you may need to tell a story or create your own resources. So ideas about how to do those things, and also a place to reach out.
Incredible. Oh, I learned so much just being present with all of you. I'm so grateful. And one last thing, there is this self-study and classroom audit tool in your book starting on page 162 that I thought was incredible. Could one of you just briefly describe what that is, so our listeners can know how they can access that either on your website or in the book?
Thank you for bringing that up, Julie. And that is also available on our website, partially illustrated. And what it is it's a audit tool. So it's basically a checklist that teachers and staffs working together can use to look through and say, okay, what are we doing great? what are we not doing at all that we need to talk about? Should we be doing this? And what are some steps that we can take to get there? And I'll give you an example. In the book, we have it kind of listed according to the way we've organized the book by chapter. So after you read the environment, curriculum and environments chapter, you can turn to the corresponding part of the audit tool. And that's, tell me the page number again.
Oh, the one that I shared? I
Yeah.
had it on page around 162.
Oh, okay. I see what we do. We did it at the end of each chapter.
Oh, the end of each chapter is the self-study tool.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
So here's one from like the admin and HR section. 1, my school has a mission or value statement that clearly expresses a value in human diversity and differences. So that's just like one, and then there's a kind of a list of things. And it's just a checklist that you can use. And it's a great way to sort of get the conversation started, like I'm saying, with a group of people or by yourself, and do a quick assessment of what area you want to dive into first.
That's incredible. And this is available also on your website. I just want to say in closing that I'll just quote what Encian said during the interview, that we all have internalized messages that we've learned. And we have to ask ourselves, does our internalized message serve all children? And how can we continue to be open to learning and growing? I know myself that I wish I had this book when my kids were growing up, because there's things I think back on that I wish I would have done differently. And there are things that I'm proud of as I learned and have grown across my life. And there's things I still don't know that I learned today. And I'm so grateful. And I hope that this message will get out to more and more people. So thank you all for being with me today.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For having us.